Hey guys, so for today, I'd like to take a look at what I keep calling stacked strings. However, these aren't actually what you would normally think of when someone says stacked strings as related to malware analysis. This is a common way that legit and malicious scripts obfuscate code. Most of the time, I see these on web pages in JavaScript. Let's first go over a simple example of what I'm talking about. Then we can look at a tool I wrote to do this for you in PowerShell to aid in practice. And then lastly, let's look at a real world example and step through how to de-ob the page and pull the IOX out using another script I wrote just for this. So let's take a look at this slide here real quick just to show you what I'm talking about. So in this example here, we have a variable that has strings in it. So in this case, this is an array. In Python, something similar to this would be a list. In this case, it's just logging the string in the 0 position and then in the 4 position. So you can see it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And sometimes you'll see these in order and sometimes you'll see these all mixed up. So we have our input here and it's the exact same thing we saw on the slide. So this is very easy, but you have to think that in real world, you're going to have this with 20, 30, 40 different strings in this, and it's going to be placing these all throughout the program in any sort of order. It's not going to be straightforward like this, but let's just see how we could use this script to de-obfuscate. So all we're going to do is in this Python script is we're going to paste in our string array, and then we're going to give it a reg match for the OX64 because that's what it's going to reference every time it pulls one of these strings. And then we're going to give it the string variable that starts that reg match so we can do some replacements and clean up the code. So all we're going to do is we're going to read in that file. We're going to find everything. We're going to do the lookup on our own, and then we're going to replace it in that line, and then we're going to append that line back out to the output. And while we're doing that, we're going to clean it up a little bit too. So if we run this, and then our output is input.txt.out. And you can see that this, we can ignore that, but the console log is going to output 1 and 5 for string values. So that's how we're able to de-ob that. So let's take a look at another way we can practice and view the stacked strings. So I wrote a quick Python script to take PowerShell scripts and mix them up and obfuscate them. So this is what I'm calling PowerShell Scratch, which basically it's an effort to obfuscate PowerShell kind of like JS is. So let's take a look at what the script is doing first, and then we'll take a look at an example. So we're taking an input file, and right off the bat, we're going to go ahead and get some random values. So we're going to get a random string. We're going to go ahead and go through our file one line at a time. So we're going to go to our PowerShell file one line at a time, and we're going to do regex matching and replacing. So we're going to find the string in each line, and then what we're going to do is we're going to find string values. We're going to add them to a stack string list. We're going to give that a random variable name, and then we're going to go ahead and perform replacements within the script itself. Another item that I do on this is I shuffle the new list, so nothing is in the same order, so you can't just look at it and read what it is. And then, and additionally down here at the bottom, we're also splitting up defined functions, so we can obfuscate those, and then we mix those up and assign them to variables as well. Let's take a quick look, and it'll make more sense when we actually look at it here. So we have this very, very simple 3-line PowerShell script, right? We have a source, we have a destination, and this is what you would see in some type of downloader. It's a regular invoke web request, and you're getting it from a source, writing it to a destination. So let's see what happens when we run our script on that. All right, so we have an output file saved as file.txt.out. We have output on the screen, but let's go ahead and open this in Notepad++ so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, so this is what we have. So we have this variable up at the top, which has a completely random name. We have this list here with strings that are broken up and randomized order, so you can't just read it. We then have another variable here, which has positional arguments for each of those strings. So the first one here is position 1, so that would be HTTP. Position 2 is this one's speed, and then it goes to position 4, and on and on. So that builds that back up. So this would be like our source, right? And then this one right here is another randomized string, which would be like we saw over there, which would be our destination, and it gets position 16, 19, and 12, and it puts those back together. And since we're also doing the invoke web request, you can see that that's what's broken up here into its own variables. And then it's built back up down here. So it's broken up into its own variables, it's mixed up, and then you put it back together here, and then it writes it to the URI here and the out file here. So then it does the replacement here for the URI for source, it does a replacement for out file here for the dest, and then it does invoke expression on C, which is our fully rebuilt expression. Now, if you just want to verify that this all works, let's go over here to Powershell ISE, and instead of, let's take our invoke expression off, because we don't need that. We don't actually want it to run, and then we're going to go ahead and run it, and now we will just go ahead and print C, and you can see invoke web request, there's our speed test, and there's our out file, just like we set it up to be. So this script kind of helps give you practice. You write your own PowerShell script, you run it against that, and then it would make a lot more sense to you trying to reverse something that you actually wrote, and then you can do that as many times as you want. Okay, so here's the last thing I want to take a look at. This is an actual example, and you can see that it starts with this variable, and there's a lot of hex characters, but it's still strings, and it's still stacked strings because you can see the commas between them, just hex encoded. There's also this part at the bottom that it does have readable text, but it's very hard to read here. So let's take this over to Notepad++, split it up a little bit, and see what we can do. Okay, so the first thing to note is many times when I see obfuscated code, outside of just the hex encoding obviously, the variable obfuscation will have hex characters with a preceding underscore. So this just seems to be a very common way of creating random variable names, and they have to have the underscore into there because a variable cannot start with an integer. So the first thing to note here is we're actually in luck when we go to decode this with Python, because these hex characters, we don't really have to do anything else to them. Just printing them out will do the conversion for us. Let's take a quick look here. So let's grab 2 and let's go to Python. So let's assign it to a random variable, and then let's print that back out, and you can see that it was able to decode those to a string without us having to do anything else. So that's good news. So really all we need to do is grab this entire top section all the way down to this let declaration and put those in our string list lookup script. So I pasted those in at the top here, and now we just need to put in our main variable for this stack of strings, and we saw that it is underscore ox41da. So we have a general regex here for that, and then we're going to look for a literal bracket. Then we're going to look for a number as many times as we need up until another literal bracket. Okay, so very simple regex. And then our string var here is basically just for cleanup. We go back through at the very end, and after we do that lookup, we clean up these values so it's easier to read. So really all you need here is just your main string variable. Okay. So the other thing we can look at before we do that is if we take off the bottom part and we put it over here, then we go ahead and do JS format and take a look here. It's a whole lot easier to read now, but we still have these string references, you know, position 0, position 1, you can see them all the way down through here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run stringless lookup on input2 txt, and we're going to get our output. And let's see what that looks like. So we're going to run stringless lookup, and now we have our output file saved as input2.txt.out. Let's look at that. Okay, so now this makes a lot more sense. We can see random values, we can see execs, we can see file names, we can see some strings being declared, we can see this length here. So there are some ATOBs in here, so that would be base 64 conversion in JavaScript. And then the part that we probably care most about would be, since this is phishing related, would be the post. So you have a post here and you have LP here. So what is LP? We saw that up at the beginning. LP is this. So it's another base 64 value, so we can decode that. So once we decode that, you can see that it's just a URL and it's sending the post there. So it'd be sending your credentials to that URL. There is additional obfuscation happening here. However, it's a lot easier to see what's going on when you get rid of that stack string at the top. When you go back through the rest of this, the rest would take you 5-10 minutes tops to go ahead and convert the remaining hex characters and clean it up a little bit. But if you tried to do the stack string part by hand, you'd be there all day. So by using this stringless lookup script, we were able to speed that up significantly. Okay, so I think that'll be all for today. Next time I'd like to try to take a look at other ways obfuscation can happen and some scripts we can use to speed up the process for those as well.